It is Wednesday, March 1st. Welcome, everybody, to the Aravosis Report. I am John Aravosis, coming to you live from Washington, D.C., where we talk every day about the latest news from Ukraine. Let me get TikTok rolling here on my iPad. And then, as always, we take a couple minutes at the beginning just to wait for folks to arrive. So introduce yourselves and all of that while we are waiting. And then I'll start the show. So if you're watching on YouTube later, you can advance 2 minutes. Or you could just watch us introduce ourselves and talk about who we are. How's everybody doing? Another glorious day in DC. It was 60 degrees today again, which is insane, but again, not complaining. Anyway, here the TikTokers are coming. Hello, TikTokers. Welcome. And YouTube, Kef on Twitch. Excellent. No Facebookers yet, but at least we got Kef over there on Twitch and mostly YouTube, which you usually have. Hey, guys. Hey, TikTokers. I am good. Thank you, Combat Medic, I should say. Hello, Wales. Washington. I'm guessing the other Washington. No cherry blossoms yet. Actually, we're afraid the cherry blossoms may get frozen. That's one of those issues when you have such a warm February, because it's way too early for it to be this warm, that a lot of the plants are coming up. So the concern is, ship my thing. The concern is that it's going to freeze our plants. There we go on TikTok. Anyway, another minute or two and we'll start. Still waiting for folks to join us. So hello, everybody. But yeah, do a little introduction. Let me make sure. See, now good. Map is correct now. TikTok always switches the direction on us every day just to keep us young. Thank you, Richard Wilkinson, for the super sticker. It was nice of you. Red, my favorite color. I don't know whether you choose that color or if it's random, but I like it. Oh man. Anyway, hello, Australia. Laurel, Maryland, not so far away. Anyway, all right, I'm about ready to start. I think we've got a critical mass. Yeah, I'll get rolling here. So welcome, everybody. I am John Aravosis. This is the Aravosis Report. It is my nightly show, Monday to Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern Time, U.S., where we talk about the latest news from Ukraine for about half hour or so. Or I talk about half hour or so, try to pick the news that I think is relevant, something that maybe gives you a larger story of what's going on. And then in the second half of the show, we take your questions. So to submit your questions or your comments too, like I'm also interested in just if I'm talking about a story and you've got your take as to, because sometimes I'll even ask you guys, what do you think's going on? Feel free to add that too. Okay. So either a question or your observation about what you think is going on. On TikTok, you can submit it via the Q&A link that's in my profile on TikTok. Thank you, Combat Medic, for the little groundhog thing, hedgehog. And for you guys, obviously, the rest of you, you can use the comment box at the bottom. I do appreciate your gifts, by the way, whether they're the super sticker or super chat questions on YouTube, which I always make a priority of the super chat questions, or the gifts on TikTok, because I do this for free. I've been doing it since the war broke out a year ago now. Initially 7 days a week, actually now 5 days a week, because try to take my weekends off a little bit. But I am doing it for free. Nobody is paying me. You guys are the ones paying me. As I always say, it's like public television. I am here. How do they say that? Brought to you by, I forget how public television says it, but basically you're the ones paying my way here. So thank you for supporting me so much. You guys have been amazing. All right, let's get rolling. So I thought I'd start today with Bakhmut. Thank you, Ali, for that. You've been asking for updates about Bakhmut lately. There aren't a lot of updates in terms of movement on the ground, but there were a lot of there was just a lot of interesting stories today about Bakhmut. So I read them through, thank you, Zoe, and compiled them, and I'm going to summarize them for you. So Bakhmut, brought to you by the viewers. Thank you, TJS. That was it. Brought to you by viewers like you. That's what PBS always says here in America. It's the public broadcasting network here in the States. So Bakhmut. Bakhmut is a Ukrainian town all the way over here by my finger, okay? It's in eastern Ukraine. It is right on the border of the Russian troops and the Ukrainian troops, okay? The Russians occupy more or less all of this, about 18% of Ukraine, this. So one of the front areas between Russian troops and Ukrainian, is Bakhmut, which is right here. That has been the area where there's been the most fighting for the last couple months. Really bad fighting. You might have heard me and others talk about how the Russians have literally been taking their soldiers and just throwing them at the Ukrainians and letting the Ukrainians kill them. I mean, no support, no defense. Most of them have been criminals. They took men from prison, and usually men that had been there like 10 years or had a 10-year sentence. So guys that were there for murder, for, pretty heavy felonies, right? And they told them, we will exonerate you if you fight for us for 10 years, or not for 10 years, if you fight for us for at least 6 months. So they took these guys and they basically just threw them at the Ukrainians. In some battles, 80% of these convicts were killed. I mean, horrific what the Russians did to these guys. Anyway, that's Bakhmut. Now, we've been talking for a while about Bakhmut because, and I won't go through it all right now, but I do have an interesting quote about this. We've asked, why does it matter? Bakhmut doesn't matter strategically, really. It doesn't matter to the Ukrainians. It doesn't matter to the Russians. We've talked about how for the Russians, there's an element of sunk costs where basically they've wasted so many men trying to take this town that now they feel like they can't give up. It's not almost, it is like a gambler. It's like a gambler who spends so much money and they keep losing, and they think, well, I've already lost $500. I've got to win back what I lost. So they keep gambling. And that's what the Russians are doing in Bakhmut. Now, the fighting I'm just giving you updates on what's been going on today. Fighting is continuing today. Russia continues to pound the city. It is reportedly not yet surrounded. One of the concerns is, or the concern, I should say, is that if Russia eventually surrounds the city, the Ukrainian troops are in the middle and they're basically dead if they're surrounded by the Russians. So nobody wants that to happen, but it looks like that is still not happening anytime soon. So there isn't any imperative, well, today at least, for the Ukrainians to pull out. Yes, let me see here. Ukraine has not yet made a decision to withdraw. Thank you, Crusher, for the swinging guy there. Ukraine has not yet made a decision to withdraw. And yesterday it was reported that the Ukrainians were going to send even more troops to Bakhmut. So the Ukrainians are doubling down and keep fighting here. Now, we talked a lot about, well, let me tell you a little bit first, and then we'll get to why the Ukrainians might be doing this. CNN reports that there was an uptick in Russia's use of combat planes to target Ukrainian defenses around Bakhmut. There's still around 4,500 civilians in Bakhmut. The town of Bakhmut, before the war, was only a town of 70,000 people. So it was not a big town, okay? Now it's about 4,500 people, including 48 children. They cannot get out because the Ukrainian troops can't access them. So basically, the current folks that are there are trapped for now. So it's about 4,800 people of 70,000 that are normally there. CNN reported today, actually not reported, CNN, in a report they did about Bakhmut today, they referenced a story they did in January where they were looking into why Zelensky cares so much about Bakhmut. And let me read a little bit to you. I'll read a little bit to you of what CNN reported a month ago, and then we'll just talk, we'll recap because I don't want to waste too much time on it because we've talked about it before. But for anybody who's new, we'll go a little bit over why the Ukrainians are fighting here. So this was from CNN in January. People familiar with Zelensky's thinking said he does not believe, thank you, David, he does not believe that that a Russian victory in Bakhmut is a fait accompli, meaning an inevitable thing that's going to happen, and that he remains reluctant to give it up. Holding Bakhmut would give Ukraine a better chance at taking back the entire Donbas region. The Donbas region is both of these provinces, Luhansk and Donetsk. Combined, they are called the Donbas region, okay? The Russians control 98% of Luhansk. They control 50% of Donetsk, and the Russians want it all. Obviously, the Ukrainians want it back. So they're saying that some of Zelensky's thinking is holding Bakhmut would give Ukraine a better chance at taking back the entire Donbas region, Zelensky believes, and that if Russia wins, if Russia were to win Bakhmut away from the Ukrainians, it will give them an opening to advance further to the strategically important eastern cities of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. Now, Kramatorsk is, so Bakhmut right here. Kramatorsk, not far away. It's right here. Right? This, I mean, you could almost barely see my finger move, right? This is Kramatorsk. Sloviansk, I don't have on the map. I seem to remember Sloviansk being a little bit up. I think it's a bit north of here, but it's in the same area. Now, so I thought I'd bring it up just because we've talked in the last few days about how clearly one of the Ukrainians' main goals has simply been to bleed the Russians dry. I mean, it has been the Russians want this town. We don't know why they want it. Let's just keep fighting them because, and this is important, because oh, thank you, Russell. Russell just bought a super chat question simply to say, I want to tell you and everybody much love and respect. Thank you, Russell. I had kind of a shitty day today. That was especially appreciated. Thank you for that, Russell. Especially with all this kind of bad news, it's nice to have stuff like that. But the Ukrainians have clearly wanted to basically, I don't know if you say attrite, is a war of attrition. Would you say attrite? Is that the verb? Or basically wear the Russians down. The Russians care so much about this town. The town doesn't really matter that much. But because the Ukrainians are defending, because it's a Ukrainian town and the Ukrainians are in the town, they occupy it, it's their town, right? It always takes you more men to attack than to defend. So if the Ukrainians are in and defending in a city, can often be even easier because you can hide in all the buildings and you can be basically shooting out of windows at the Russians. So what the Ukrainians have realized is the Ukrainians lose men fighting in Bakhmut. The Russians lose men fighting in Bakhmut, but the Russians lose a lot more men than the Ukrainians lose. So the Ukrainians say, you know what? Let's keep winnowing the Russians down. The other interesting point, and I found this yesterday and told you guys, but I'm going to mention it again because I thought it was a really interesting point. One of the Ukrainian officials, thank you, Wanda, for the unicorn. Or unicorn Pegasus, I think. Yep, thank you for that. Appreciate that. One of the Ukrainian officials also mentioned that Ukraine was fighting in Bakhmut as basically a way of holding the Russians back in preparation for the Ukrainian offensive that isn't happening till this spring. And the way I interpreted that of meaning was, we know in principle, right? Because mind you, remember, everything the Ukrainians says, everything the Russians say could be disinformation. The Ukrainians could be saying things about an upcoming offensive just to freak out the Russians and to give them false info. But let's assume the Ukrainians are telling the truth, because even our guys in the West think that the Ukrainians are planning some kind of big attack this spring. Could be in March, could be April, could be May, okay? What the Ukrainians are saying is they are still fighting in Bakhmut to basically hold the Russians down. In other words, keep them occupied there while the Ukrainians wait and prepare for their big offensive, because the Ukrainians are trying to get all of these German tanks, for example, in. There's other tanks coming from Poland as well, but a lot of the German tanks. So the Ukrainians, I think the Ukrainians want to basically tie the Russians down in Bakhmut so the Russians don't have a chance to go somewhere else and cause more trouble. I think that's sort of what's going on. And in the end, like we said, they're trying to kill as many Russian troops as they can and injure them and destroy their vehicles. Now, what's interesting about that is take what we said right there about what the Ukrainians were doing and why, and we're going to apply it to Volodar, which is a town further south, but not by much. Volodar is down here, and it's been a while that I've looked at Volodar on my map. I'm going to say Volodar is a little to the east of Donetsk. I'm pretty sure it's a little bit to the east of Donetsk. Volodar is. That's the town where a few weeks ago I was telling you guys the Russians got utterly obliterated. I mean, horrific battle. The Russians got destroyed. And the New York Times did a fascinating analysis today of how the Ukrainians beat the Russians there. And what I thought was interesting about it is it's a lesson overall about the Ukrainians. Because first of all, it tells you a lot about how the Ukrainians do this stuff, and basically really smart strategy and really kind of I don't want to say nasty, not nasty in a bad way, but nasty in they've thought it's chess. They've thought 3 steps ahead and just trapped the Russians. Now, before I talk about Volodar and how the Ukrainians destroyed the Russians there, I want to mention briefly my Discord. We have a Discord community, discord.aravosis.com. It's kind of a chat community for people not familiar with it. You can find the link on YouTube at all via my aravosis.com site link. You guys can find it via aravosis.com, or you can go to the link in my profile on TikTok. There's the Linktree link. Go there. You can find my all my links, including my Discord. One of the cool things with the Discord is we have a lot of cool auctions going on. Thank you, Crusher, for that. That is one of my faves. I'm a big star guy. We've got a lot of auctions going on, and the auctions are cool things that we've bought from Ukraine and brought back here, and basically are auctioning here from the States. 50% of the money from the auction goes to support my work because I do this for free and I'm doing it full time. So, and I'm not rich and no one's paying the bills. So the auctions, just like your guys' gifts here, allow me to keep doing this. So thank you for that. And 50% of the auction money we've been funneling back into Ukraine. We bought drones for the Ukrainian troops. We've bought boots for the Ukrainian troops. We've bought supplies for people with disabilities that were trapped on the front line. There's a home for people with disabilities that was right on the front line with the Russians. We got supplies there. We bought a bus. I won't tell all of what we've done, but we've spent over $80,000 that we raised from you guys. I haven't taken a dime of it. Zero. Typically, we just have you guys send the money to my friend Vlad in Ukraine so that I don't touch it at all. Thank you, Russell, for the super sticker. But we raised over $80,000. One of the coolest things we did is we bought a bus. We bought an old bus. I think it might have been $4,000 for the bus. I'm not sure now in retrospect. I mean, we've got the records. And we bought medical supplies, filled the bus with medical supplies, had somebody drive it to Mariupol. Mariupol, you may know, is a town occupied by the Russians. It's here in southeastern Ukraine. It's the town where the Azov battalion had their big fight in the steel plant for 2 months. Thank you, Alan. Where for 2 months, the 2,000 Ukrainian troops fought the 14,000 Russian troops. It's the same town where the Russians blew up the movie theater that had the word children written outside in Russian. Remember? It said children. It was Dety, like D-E-T-Y, on the outside, and the Russian planes bombed it anyway, knowing children were hiding inside. Mariupol has been a disaster. Anyway, we got the bus in there, we dropped off medicine, and we picked up a number of Ukrainians that were trying to flee the town because the Russians won't let them leave. The Russians are telling them, if you want to leave, you can go to Russia. And then once you go to Russia, you're never coming back. Thank you, Aravosis, for that. Anyway, that's a long story short about what we do on the Discord. I wanted to tell you really quick. We just finished auctioning off the Russian plane parts. So the last box of Russian plane parts, a Russian plane that was shot down over Ukraine, we auctioned off. Colonel Mustard's the winner. Congratulations, Colonel Mustard. We still have the Zelensky sweatshirts. I went and was able to find the sweatshirts that Zelensky wears. I mean, quite literally, these are the sweatshirts. We found the company that he buys them from, and we've got a number of these. You'll notice, too, because like the shoulder droops, if you look at the pictures of Zelensky, you'll see these are the sweatshirts. That's the Ukrainian trident, the symbol of Ukraine on the front. We're auctioning these. We've got some cool military commemorative stamps for the military, some kids' drawings, a really cool kids' drawing from a little girl, 5th grade girl, so probably 10 years old or so, in Ukraine, who drew a bunch of pictures for the soldiers, for the Ukrainian troops, to honor them. The school sent us a number of them. We've been using them for T-shirts, and I'm auctioning off one of the pictures. And the final thing, I am excited. I've got 2 more of these. I'm finally putting another one up for auction. The Azov-style bracelets that everybody loves. These are the bracelets that the Ukrainian government made from the last batch of steel from the Azov-style plant. This is the plant where, I told you earlier, the 2,000 Ukrainian troops were holed out against the 14,000 Russians, and they held out for 2 months. The Ukrainians decided to make bracelets out of the steel from the plant because the Russians control the plant, but some of the steel had already been exported. Well, this gets even more interesting. Okay, you can see the bracelet with the steel, and there's the Ukrainian trident in the middle. It says, is Azov-style, so like from Azov-style. You guys can probably see the trident better here. What's cool about this last batch, we got the last, I mean, they don't make them anymore, but I've got 2 of these from the last batch. The final batch, the Ukrainian government had a sign that they put up, an art exhibit in downtown Kyiv. And the sign said, and I've got it here, shoot, I keep forgetting what the sign said. The sign said, oh wait, I've got it here. Hold on. I've got it on my phone. It was really cool. But basically, they put up an art exhibit of the steel, and then they, here it is. They then took down the art exhibit and made the bracelets from it. So the art exhibit said in Ukrainian, "I believe in the armed forces of Ukraine." Let me show you this. So the top one is with it there in Ukrainian. I believe in the armed forces of Ukraine. The bottom one is after it's gone. Okay. And that's steel from the steel plant that the Ukrainians were defending for 2 months. Well, the Ukrainians decided to take that last batch of steel and make them into bracelets. This and the other one are from the last batch. So these are actually made from the cool art installation that was in downtown Kyiv honoring the troops. Anyway, I love this stuff. I actually ended up not keeping any of these for myself, but what do you do? We've got 2 more left. This is the second to last. It's being auctioned off right now. You can check all of it out in our Discord. Go to the Discord. Sign up for the Discord. It's free. Some of these things are in the VIP section. Some are in the public. The VIP section, you've got to be a paying member of the Discord, meaning you go over to Patreon and you at least subscribe for $5 a month. The public section of the auction is for everybody, so you don't have to pay for that. You pay to bid. And then the bidding instructions are there. A little confusing, but not so bad. All right, let me keep going. Any more questions? Folks might be able to help you in the comment, in the moderators, or we can talk at the very end. All right, but the links are all in my profile, aravosis.com. Click that or go to the links in my profile on TikTok. All right, Volodar. So Volodar has me very excited. Volodar, as I said, is a city in eastern Ukraine. Again, more or less around here on the front. I think it's east. It might be a little west. I think it's a little east. On the front between the Russians and the Ukrainians. And the Ukrainians destroyed the Russians a few weeks ago. Absolutely destroyed them. At one point, the Russian troops so freaked out that they got up and ran out of their vehicles and ran. They abandoned at least 30 working military vehicles of all kinds. I mean, tanks, everything. And they just got up and abandoned them because they were afraid of getting killed by the Ukrainians. So the Ukrainians got 30 of them right there, which is amazing. Now, the New York Times did an investigation as to what happened at Volodar. I'm going to read you this because it's absolutely fascinating what the Ukrainians pulled off. So let me read you a little bit of this. Okay, new Ukrainian tanks had not shown up yet for this battle. As we know, tanks are coming in. We believe a couple tanks have already arrived from the west, the German tanks, but in general, we're still waiting for the German tanks to come in mass. So the German tanks had not arrived yet, but the Russians actually did have some of their new tanks that they bought to Volodar, okay? As the article said, thank you for the hat there. Who was that, Nat? As the article said, in its first wide-scale deployment of the new equipment from the Russians was decimated. I'm just going to read you from the article. A 3-week battle on a plain near the coal mining town of Volodar in southern Ukraine. I'll pull this up in a second, Cliff. Okay, once I'm done with the article. A 3-week battle on a plain near the coal mining town of Volodar in southern Ukraine produced what Ukrainian officials say was the biggest tank battle of the war so far and a stinging setback for the Russians. When it was over, not only had Russia failed to capture Volodar, but it also had made the same mistake that cost Moscow hundreds of tanks earlier in the war, advancing columns into ambushes. Blown up on mines, hit with artillery, or obliterated by anti-tank missiles, the charred hulks of Russian armored vehicles now litter farm fields all about Volodar, according to Ukrainian military drone footage. Ukraine's military says Russia has lost at least 130 tanks and armored personnel carriers in the battle. That's considered significant. In one indication that Russia is running short of experienced tank commanders, Ukrainian soldiers said they captured an army medic who had been reassigned to operate a tank. They took a field doctor and put him in to drive the tank because they had nobody else to drive the tank. Okay. In Volodar, by last week, Russia had lost so many machines, meaning so many tanks and other equipment, to sustain armored assaults that they had to change tactics and resort only to infantry attacks. So meaning the Ukrainians had blown up so many tanks and so many vehicles that the Russians had to switch to simply sending their men in on foot with no backup. And when you come in on foot, what happens? You can imagine you get mowed down by the Ukrainians. How the Ukrainians did it, there was a long part of the article about this, but I'll just summarize to you, having read the article, how the Ukrainians did it, okay? The Ukrainians set up a kill zone along a road. They mined everything around the road with landmines, but they didn't put landmines on the road. So they basically channeled the Russians onto a road that the Russians thought was free because the road didn't have bombs. But they had bombs, landmines, all along the side of the road in the fields. So what do? They get the Russians along the road, and then they open fire on the Russians. They're in the bushes. They come out of the bushes. They had javelins. They had Stugna Ps. So these are like anti-tank, the big kind of on your shoulder anti-tank weapons that, shoot, kill the tank. They start firing at them. The tanks freak out and turn around. Well, what happens? They're on a thin road, and the road's fine. The road had no mines, but there's mines all along the side of the road. The tanks go to turn around, and as soon as they turn around, they hit the mines. The tanks blow up and get stuck. Now what happens is you've got blown up tanks here at the beginning and at the end, and nobody else can move, because the tanks are now blocking the road because they're blown up. And then the Ukrainians brought everything in and destroyed them. It was an entire ambush that they had planned in advance. They had planned exactly where they thought the Russians would go. They planned how they were going to make the Russians go that way. I mean, it was absolutely ingenious of these guys. I mean, maybe some of you military folks are going to say that's normal. Well, I shouldn't say it's normal. I mean, lesser military might not pull it off, but it's really genius. And like I said, I bring the story up to show you just how creative the Ukrainians are being, how smart they're being, how forward they're playing chess, and how, by the way, the fact that the Russians already, according to the New York Times, this is a problem the Russians had before, was walking into ambushes, and they did it again. Oh, the other thing they said, I'm sorry, I was almost forgetting this. The other thing the Times article said is part of the reason the Russians walked into the ambush, thank you, Loyalty, for the gift there, is because they're using so many of the new troops. Remember, Putin had that big call up in September of all the new troops, and they got like 200,000 or 300,000 new men, but they didn't train them. Remember, we were saying like these guys got like a day or two of training max. Some of them got no training at all. Thank you, Iggy. So they took these troops that have no training, put them on the front line in these tanks. Not only are they not expert at using tanks, right? We said they used an army medic, a medic to drive a tank, but these guys have not been trained in how the Ukrainians operate. So they were not aware that the Ukrainian strategy tends to be to set up ambushes. So that's why they walked into an ambush. Thank you, Bonnie. The reason, again, I bring this story up is A, I just think it's interesting, but B, it may give us a window into what could happen as the next few months go on, as the Russian offensive kicks in and gets bigger. Thank you, Frank, for the hat there. And as the Ukrainian counteroffensive kicks in a few months as well, knock on wood, cross our fingers, but it seems these new Russian troops are not doing the Russian military any favors, and the Ukrainians are still just boom, 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 on top of everything. Good news. I always put the caveat, let's not count as we say in English, let's not count our chickens until they hatch. We have no idea of knowing if the Ukrainians are going to win, but this is good news to see this kind of stuff happening. I also have a Patreon account set up, just to remind folks. It's patreon.com/Aravosis. It's another way that you can support my work and support any creators you know. If you see people with a Patreon account, you like their work, it's a nice way to be able to give them basically a donation every month automatically. $5 a month, $10, $25 a month. And it helps support their work. And it's nice from our perspective to be able to see how much is coming in. Mine is patreon.com/Aravosis. You can find it on aravosis.com for you guys. You guys can find the link via my profile on TikTok. A number of you have been actually signing up lately. We've been getting almost one or two a day, which I really appreciate. You guys are fabulous. My sweatshirt is, I got it from Ukraine. Thank you, Crusher, for that. Got it from you. Someone was asking. It is literally the sweatshirt that Zelensky wears. We got it from the same people, and we are auctioning them off on my Discord. So you can go to discord.aravosis.com, and we're taking 50% of the proceeds go back to Ukraine. 50% of the proceeds go to support my work because I do this for free and I do it full time. So basically, it lets me to keep doing this. Thank you, Annie, for the hat. But I do as well just appreciate the gifts coming in on TikTok and Super Chat. Please keep them coming. All right, let's keep going. Hungary being a little bit of a pain in the ass still, it seems. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me get to Cliff's question first. Hold on. Cliff had a Super Chat question that I was waiting to finish the Volodar discussion. I know you're not military, but if the Ukrainian army had, thank you, Louis. If the Ukrainian army had F-16, F-18s, A-10s, various U.S. aircraft, thank you, Dawn, different F-16, F-18 fighter jets, A-10s more slowly, they go slower and help take out tanks and vehicles on the ground, but they need support because they're very slow. From what I know, the Warthog. Thank you, Blue Moons, for that. Wouldn't that devastate the staging areas of Russians and end this war by April? We need somebody military to weigh in because I know with the A-10s, which are the Warthogs, which are the slow-flying ones, that they're the tank killers. We use them a lot in Iraq, I remember. They need a lot of, you guys have actually helped teach me this. They need a lot of support from other weapons like F-16s and other things to protect them. That's the first problem. F-16s and F-18s, I know there is significant concern about anti-aircraft capabilities by both the Ukrainians and the Russians, which is why neither party has been able to establish control over all of Ukraine. Basically, the Russians have control over the Russian-held territory. So it's very hard to fly over the Russian-held territory, but they don't have control over the Ukrainian-held territory. So I don't know, for example, if the F-16s and F-18s and A-10s were coming into Russian-held territory to try to hit the Russian troops on the ground, whether the Russians have such a good anti-ballistic, anti-aircraft system that they'd be able to take out our planes. I don't know. Let me see, because you guys are very good at this. Military folks, weigh in. I'm going to read some of the comments here. It would definitely slow down any land assaults and air defense. It depends on the Russian portable anti-aircraft systems. F-16s, let me see here. Helicopters and Harrier jump jets would do better. Pull a little bit of you guys over on YouTube as well. Let me see here. Let me see. A-10s do 10% of what an F-16 does. F-16s do 90% of what an A-10 does. They don't need A-10s. They need F-16s, according to Daniel. Yeah, I mean, Roshin says first issue is Ukraine doesn't have and doesn't seem to be getting those jets. Correct. We're not going to be giving them those jets anytime soon. Alex says A-10s absolutely need air support or air superiority if they are to be used to aid ground forces. Peter says, my buddy in the Army intel says the Russians have very good anti-aircraft missiles and guns. That was one of my concerns. Oh, interesting. Sorry, Brave Cobra's weighing in separately about the tank ambush in Vuhledar. The tank ambush feels a bit like the battle at Trasimene, or Trasimene, I don't know, depending where, by Hannibal in 217 BC. I have got to read up on my military history. I've actually I need some good suggestions of books about like ancient military history. My godfather was the expert on this stuff, and he had passed away 20 years ago. Greek, loved this stuff, and he would tell you about the Battle of Thermopylae and blah, blah, blah. And I need to find like a book that a layman could read that's interesting. I think for any of us, that's interesting, right? That isn't like a boring textbook, but is an interesting textbook about some of basically the major battles in military history over the years, especially ancient, I think would be fascinating. Let me see. I'd love to see more on better attack helicopters. Well, this is the other thing. PB&J is saying Slovakia wants to send MiGs, but that they've got that are in storage. Remember, Poland wanted to send MiGs a year ago, practically a year ago. And the US and Germany went, bleh. So we've got planes we could send Ukraine, and they're planes that Ukraine knows how to use. Thank you, Big Gator Girl. It's very, very annoying. I mean, the A-10 is a flying tank. The F-16s will go down too easily. We have so many F-16s laying around. They're making them drones now. Anyway, you get it. You get it. Thank you, Jill. And who was the other L for that? All right, let me keep going with this. Hungary is playing games. So Hungary, God bless Hungary. Hungary is playing games with NATO. What a surprise. Basically, because of all the BS that's been going on with Turkey, and with Turkey basically refusing to vote in favor of Finland and Sweden joining NATO, the Hungarians are now doing the same thing. The Hungarians are coming out and saying, surprise, surprise, they want something too. Well, I am not the expert on this. You Europeans are, but the European Union has been holding back a lot of money for Hungary, because Hungary has been, let's just say, challenged in the department of being a democracy. Urban, who runs the country, is not a Democrat with a small d. He like Erdogan in Turkey, is a wannabe dictator, and he's been definitely going that way. The country is definitely decidedly less democratic. Some people are saying the country isn't even democratic anymore. It's bad. The European Union, in order to punish them, said, look, we're not giving you European Union funds until you straighten it out and become more of a democracy. Well, now what the Hungarians are saying is, if you want us to let Finland and Sweden join NATO, you need to give us the European Union funds. And unfortunately, I think this is what happens when you let Erdogan do what he did. And frankly, it's what happens when you let Putin do what he did. We sat there with Erdogan and we went, please, please help us. Don't be mean to us. And then Hungary said, well, shit, why don't we do it too? You know, if they're getting something, let's us take hostages too. And they're doing it. So, you know, lovely people, lovely people. Russia is threatening to renew the grain export deal, to not renew the grain export deal. It's coming up for renewal. As you may know, the United Nations, Turkey, Ukraine, and Russia got together and agreed to finally let the Ukrainians export grain. The exports are coming more or less from here in southern Ukraine. The problem is the Russians had pretty much threatened to torpedo the ships if the Ukrainians exported their grain. The Ukrainians need to export the grain for money, for their economy. A lot of the grain goes to Africa. A lot of the grain goes to Asia. And some of the grain also goes, maybe half of it goes to Europe as well. But the point is, a lot of it goes to Africa too, that really needs the grain. I mean, there's been a lot of the famine issues are back in Africa again. And the Russians are once again threatening to basically starve Africa. Mind you, Africa that refuses to take a position on the war other than Morocco. And I'm forgetting, is it Tanzania? Who's the other country that's been good in Africa? Morocco and I think Tanzania, but not Tanzania, Tunisia, not Tanzania. Morocco and Tunisia, I think, are the two that are the good guys. The rest of the African countries refusing to pick a side, at best refusing to pick a side. Thank you, Louis, for the hat. And so as a thank you, the Russians are threatening to starve their civilians again. Tunisia, that's what I thought. Thanks, Callum. Are threatening to starve their civilians again. Couple more stories, and then we're done with this, and we can do the Q&A. Ukrainian electrical the Ukrainian electrical grid has been operating without deficit or wide-ranging blackouts for 18 days now. Now, that's been interesting. You know nothing. What was it? You know nothing, John. What's Jon Snow? Somebody wrote, you know absolutely nothing. You know absolutely nothing, Jon Snow. That's from Game of Thrones. Not Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones. Yes, Game of Thrones. You know nothing, Jon Snow. I brought that up because we were talking the other day about how, with all of the Russians attacking the Ukrainian infrastructure and trying to take out the Ukrainian power, the fact that for months now, the Russians have been blowing up Ukrainian power stations, the fact that Ukrainians now for 3 weeks, Jon Snow, exactly, for 3 weeks, have had the power back on 100%. There's no more rationing. For a while there, they only had power on for 8 hours a day. And basically your 8 hours were spread out. You got 4 hours overnight, you know, in the madrugada, as the Spanish would say, from like midnight to 5 a.m., you got 4 hours. And then you got 4 hours through the rest of the day for all your power. Now it's 100% back on. I mean, if anything, it's embarrassing that Russia has thrown this many missiles and Ukraine's power is back on. Good for Ukraine. Finally, BBC shared a story today of a 12-year-old Russian girl named Masha who drew a picture in support of the war in Ukraine. Excuse me, in support of Ukraine in the war. Let me show you her picture really quick. And then I'll tell you, of course, what happened to her. Here we go. So this is Masha's picture. And you can see, it says in Russian, I am against the war. And you can see her standing there with the Ukrainian flag, putting out her hands to stop incoming Russian missiles, all right, with the Russian flag there. And she might be with her dad because she's like a little kid and an adult. Show you guys. So you see, it says, I am against war. And she's got the little Ukrainian flag and a person holding their hands up against the Russian missiles that are coming in. That's all she did. As a result, the BBC reported on this, shared the story. As a result, the authorities beat up her father, stole his savings from the bank, detained him, sent his daughter to an orphanage, and now the father is facing a possible 3 years in prison, but the government is considering reclassifying his crime to something more serious because, the more serious crimes of people who, put out propaganda that's against the troops is 15 years in prison. All this because this cute little girl literally drew a little girl's drawing. Look at this. That's it. That's the crime. This little girl did the drawing. Okay? Russia is a dictatorship. Our country has problems. Our country has lots of problems. All of our countries have lots of problems. But this is the kind of thing, and the Soviets did the same thing. This is the kind of thing that would always get me to speak up when people would say, you criticize the Soviets or the Russians. America, look at how you treat black people. And there's a real problem with racism in America. But we don't throw people in jail because their daughter drew a picture with crayon that was critical of the government. and beat the father, take his savings and throw him in jail. I mean, you'd have a nationwide, and if it happened, you would have protests nationwide. The people who did it would be going to jail. You'd have court cases just like we're having. I mean, it just makes me sick. It's so, but it's sad too. And it's scary because this is what Russia is becoming again, All right. That's it for the news. Let's jump to your guys' questions and answers. Please do keep the gifts coming. I appreciate them and they do help support my work. So thank you for that. I will put a little bit of chapstick on my lips, a little bit of water, and we start the questions. Now, remember, you guys on TikTok, you can submit your questions via the Q&A link that's in my profile. And again, comments too. If you got a comment on any of the stories or your theory on what's going on with the war, you can put that too. It doesn't have to be a question. You guys, obviously, you can use the comment box at the bottom. And if you use super chat questions, I will get to those first. Otherwise, I try to scroll and get to as many of these as I can in the hour allotted. And we'll probably go a little bit over because my new segment went about 10 minutes over. So I'll try to do about half hour of questions here. All right, TikTok, Q&A. Well, okay. I think somebody's asking a question. I think they're mixing a couple stories. Paw WLC is saying, I saw this headline, talk of removing Putin should stop or conflict could spread. Russia will likely escalate false flags. There was an article today by, I'm forgetting who now, a Russia expert that I think Sky News may have written about it, but it might have been a Russia expert with the IISS, a big think tank in London. And he was saying that basically, I'm trying to remember this. From what I remember, the article was saying that he thinks Ukraine can win. Question as to whether Ukraine can get back Crimea or not. But he thought it was very unhelpful. Thank you, Crusher. Very generous of you. Thank you. He thought it was very dangerous and counterproductive for people in the West to talk about wanting Russia to fall apart as a country. Now, I will say, the Russians keep accusing us of that. I don't know a lot of people who walk around in any position of power and say, yes, we need Russia to fall apart as a country. You don't see people really saying that. So I'm not sure what he's referring to, so I don't know if that's what you're referring to, but that was at least one big story today about somebody kind of saying, hey guys, don't go there. Oh, good. Sure. Brave Cobra says he can share a couple links to those YouTube channels. Oh, in Discord, if someone is interested in ancient battle moves. Oh, that's interesting. Because I was asking about sort of boning up on, of course, I said books. I'm not even thinking YouTube. I should be thinking YouTube, but boning up on the history of war in the ancient world and some of the big battles, what happened, why they mattered, what lessons they taught us. I think that stuff is interesting. Yeah, Cobra, if you could put it on if you can put it on on Discord. Oh, sure. Put it in Discord. Perfect. Yeah. I was going to say, because Discord's easy. I would say maybe put it in Ukraine. Put it in the Ukraine chat, because even though it's not Ukraine, it's related to our discussion here. And maybe it's the most obvious for people to find since we're talking about Ukraine. Why don't you do that? Yeah. Put them in the Discord. That's great idea. Thank you. Thank you. No, I think that stuff is, and I mean, Alexander the Great, I'm Greek. Like I should, and by the way, as I learned recently, Cleopatra, Greek. There's a whole move to make Cleopatra African. And I was Googling and looking it up, and apparently her uncle was a famous Greek general, or not her uncle. I think her grandfather or father was a famous Greek general. She's Greek. Cleopatra, one of ours. Yes. And if you're Greek, the Greeks are, yes, but go back. The Ptolemies, I believe, are Greek. Go back and Google it. You'll see what I mean. You go back to either her father or her grandfather, and they're Greeks. They were Greeks. The Greeks, by the way, love making a connection. The movie Big Fat Greek Wedding was totally true. We love to sit there and go, so-and-so, Greek. It's our thing. It's what we do. But anyway, Google it. I was very surprised. But yeah, thank you, Brave Cobra. That would be totally cool. Doopies is super chatting. Surely there are more MiGs available in Eastern Europe to be donated and replaced with F-16s. Absolutely. We know that Poland had a couple hundred MiGs at the beginning of the war. It was like March or April. Remember the big article? And we all got excited because the article was Poland to give Ukraine, 200 MiGs or whatever. And then came the controversy. Poland said we'd be happy to turn them over to the Americans at Ramstein or whatever, the American air base in Germany. And the Americans can turn them over to the Ukrainians. And the Americans went, we don't want to turn them over. And the Germans went, we don't want it happening at a base in our country. And everybody got scared. And who knows why? Everyone got scared. Ukraine didn't get them. There was talk, which I've mentioned to you guys before. Oops, that's my, hello. That's TikTok automatically turning itself on. There was talk about the Poles, at least in part. This was talk. I don't know if it's true, but the Poles disassembled some of the F-16s and passed them along to the Ukrainians as parts and said, well, if we can't give you F-16s, we can at least give you repair parts to keep your current F-16s going. What I'd read was it's possible the Poles took apart their F-16s, like basically big plastic bag. Here are your parts, but basically it was IKEA. They gave them the entire plane with instructions, and the Ukrainians reconstructed the planes. Now, if that's true, we don't know how many planes the Poles have left and how many planes the Poles gave away. Nonetheless, yes, the idea would be America provides F-16s to Europe, and the Europeans provide their MiGs to Ukraine. The problem is, guys, did I say F-16 MiGs? Did I say F-16s? Yeah, I may have been mixing up my planes here, but yeah, that the Poles have MiGs. The Poles had MiGs 29s. Right. Was I saying F-16s? No, that the American, what I was trying to say was the Poles would give their MiGs to the Ukrainians, and the Americans would give F-16s, or better, to the Poles to make up for the planes the Poles are giving away. That's what I was trying to say. The problem with that is that presupposes that the Americans want Ukraine to get planes. Biden doesn't want Ukraine to get planes. He doesn't want it. He has made this clear. This is not a situation of Biden going, oh my God, we so want to get Ukraine planes. If we could only figure out how to do it. That's not what's going on. He doesn't want to give them planes. So he also doesn't want to do it via some deal with Poland. He's not going to give Poland F-16s because he doesn't want to give Ukraine planes. He thinks giving Ukraine planes, even MiG fighter jets, is going to be escalation, and Putin will get angry and you won't like him when he's angry. I'm sorry. I like Biden. He's done a good job in this war. He's afraid of Vladimir Putin, and he's letting Vladimir Putin set U.S. policy. And I think it's really weak. And it empowers Putin to do even worse things in the future. And by the way, Ukraine's not going to win this war if we keep playing it half-assed. And that's what we're doing. It's cutting the baby in half. It's giving them just enough, but not enough. So we're giving them a lot. I compare it to chemotherapy for people who say, but aren't we spending a lot of money, right? You get cancer. It costs $100,000 to treat you because this is America and that's what it costs. Your doctor says, well, you know, 100,000, I don't want to piss off the neighbors. So how about if we just give you 50,000 in chemotherapy? You need 100,000, but if I give you 100,000, the neighbors are going to get really pissed. So we'll give you 50,000, and hey, 50,000, that's a lot of money, right? Everybody from the outside would look and go, you gave her 50,000 in chemotherapy. Why is she complaining? I don't have 50,000 in chemotherapy. That's a lot of money. The problem is it's not the amount of money they need to cure her cancer. And that's what's going on. We keep slowly giving the Ukrainians better weapons. We keep not giving them the weapons they need until it's too late. And then once we say we're going to give it, it takes months to get them there, right? The U.S. tanks that we promised a month ago may arrive sometime in the next year or two, okay? That's when the U.S. tanks might arrive. It maybe, if we're lucky, a few of them will arrive in 6 months. Nobody thinks that. People think 1 to 2 years U.S. tanks could arrive. The German tanks, some are arriving, but the German tanks are a problem too. Okay? Thank you for the pause there, Dawn. The German tanks are a problem too. What would have solved this? Oh, I don't know. Had we talked about tanks last March instead of this January, that would have given us a 10-month lead. That 10-month lead means U.S. tanks might have been arriving about now rather than in a year from now. It means Germany, we would have had a year to get those German tanks in order. Now over the next many months, we're trying to figure out the German tanks. I just, you don't wait to the last. It's not even waiting to the last minute. It's incremental. I mean, at least from what I had learned about Vietnam, again, I'm not a war scholar, but I seem to recall in Vietnam that we had this policy of slowly doing more and more and more and more and more. And it was just this gradual thing. And at least from what I learned as a my foreign policy training, not military, but we had to study military stuff, was that gradual military involvement is not the smartest thing to do, because basically you never have enough to win, and you get in, you don't have enough, you kind of screw up, then you add more, but it's not enough. So you kind of do a little, and each step of the way, the other guy's getting stronger and you're not winning. And the Soviets did supply Vietnam. And the Soviets didn't just supply Vietnam. From what I'd read, the Soviets supplied Vietnam with fighter jets that killed American troops. So there is even a precedent for supplying fighter jets. But we're afraid of Vladimir Putin because he has nuclear weapons. And again, one of my replies to that is the Russians have had nuclear weapons since 1949. Why are we pretending like last year we suddenly discovered there's nuclear weapons in this bar? What do you mean? Oh my God, right? Like it's suddenly a big surprise and we're suddenly afraid of the Russians. Pisses me off. Just totally pisses me off. You know this. Anybody who watches the show know this pisses me off. So yes, Dupies, there are MiGs available in Eastern Europe. Biden doesn't want them to go there. Now, mind you, I will say one thing. It may not just be Biden. It's France and Germany. He has to hold the coalition together. And for all we know, the French or the Germans could have said, if you send fighter jets, we're out. Right? They could have. So Biden might be saying it because Biden slipped once. Several months ago, Biden slipped. And when he was being pushed on, it was either the tanks, but I think it was the fighter jets. And he got pushed, and his answer wasn't the escalation answer about pissing off Putin. It was, I've got a coalition to hold together, was his answer on why he wasn't providing, and I think it was the fighter jets. And that means somebody in the coalition doesn't want us giving fighter jets, and if we do, they might pull out. So I wonder about that, right? They may have done that. So somebody said my boyfriend was in bed waiting for me. Your dad's in bed? Okay, sorry. You got to give me my dad gay joke. You should have given me one quick right before you banned him, giving me just my one little chance to go. Yeah, your dad told me he doesn't mind staying up late. Hang on here. Make sure I didn't miss any super chat. Oh, there is more. Daniel O'Neill. Any word on the M2 Bradleys? Zippo. Are they getting in soon? Oh, the Bradleys. Oh, I'm sorry. The M2. Oh, the Bradleys. That's a good question. That's a really good question. There's been no news on the Bradleys. So what Daniel's talking about is the U.S. had promised two different things. I'm going to pull this up as we're talking. One is these M1 tanks. I think they're M1A2s or something, but they're the Abrams tanks. The other were the M2 Bradley fighting vehicles, Bradleys, that are quite good in their own right. Correct me if I'm wrong, but are the Bradleys not called tank killers? The issue with Bradleys, though, is they don't have as strong of a defense against, like, so if a tank attacks a Bradley could, blow up, which would be bad. But that's a good question, though, as to what I've seen no updates, but let me see here. All right. Also, I'm trying to find it from like real media, which is the other thing, because when it's all in kind of goofy. Let's see. Nope. I mean, like something called Mesomedia doesn't thrill me. 60 M2 Bradley infantry fighting vehicles have already been loaded onto the ship and are going to Ukraine. This is a more modern M2A2 version. I don't know what Mesomedia is. I see. This was reported by the official Twitter account of the Embassy of the U.S. in Kyiv, citing a tweet of U.S. Transcom, that is the U.S. States Transportation Command. Here we go. U.S. Transportation Command is delivering, this is from the U.S. government, is delivering more than 60 Bradleys to Ukraine as part of the U.S. aid package. And watch as soldiers and contractors load the ship's integrity at the port of Charleston. This was February 6th, so a month ago. So a month ago, they were loading them on ships heading over. I don't know how long it takes to get them there. Okay, there we go. So there is some news. I mean, it's been a month. It doesn't take a month I would think it doesn't take a month to get there. My guess is they've got to come into Poland and then they go across Poland into Ukraine. Not my guess. It's got to be, right? I guess it's possible that they come through Romania or somewhere else, but they've got to be Poland. So, yeah, I mean, that's great. Maybe there are Bradleys there already. That'd be great. You've seen Hummers? Huh. Bradleys. Okay, Callum is saying Bradleys are in Germany. They arrived last week or the week before. Okay. So they're on their way at least. That's good. Okay. Just looking here. Huh. Yes, this live does have some of the best moderators. They've gotten very good. What I like is we've been doing this long enough now that our moderators have gotten good at at sussing out who are the bad guys. I always tell them who's the bad guy and who's somebody who's just having a bad day. If somebody's having a bad day, try to get them to calm down. If somebody's just a bad guy Russian troll, then boot them. But it can often be very difficult to tell the difference. So there you go, Daniel. Interesting. That's great. Well, and again, this is why, actually, I will say this too. I know the Americans have been telling the Ukrainians to hold off. Well, there's two things, actually. The U.S. was telling the Ukrainians, I believe, to hold off on their offensive until more weapons came in and the Russians tired themselves out. At the same time, we keep seeing these articles in the paper that the U.S. government is telling the Ukrainians, you better have a win soon or we're not giving you more money. So there's this weird, dissonance between telling them, hey, wait until the good stuff comes, and this way the Russians tire themselves out and waste, or you guys better go in soon. So, let's see. Anya with a super chat question. Thank you for that. Do you see any way a peace deal happens other than Putin losing power? And thank you, whoever did the flower there. I'm trying to see the flower. The flower sort of came on and disappeared off my screen. Who was that? Oh, hi, March. That was Lorna, I think. I think that was Lorna. Thank you, Lorna. Thank you, Bonnie. I mean, the piece. Thanks, Hazel. I mean, I'm sort of at a loss for words because a peace deal, for sure, a peace deal happens because Ukraine and Russia want it to happen. Thank you, Robert, for the hat. That means that one country loses or both countries lose. Like either one country loses and therefore peace is imposed and they don't have a choice. So either Ukraine gets obliterated or Russia gets like overthrown or something, right? Because they're doing so badly and the new government says this has to stop. That's one possibility. Or like in Afghanistan, things just got so bad after 10 years that the government had to pull out. Or it can happen because Ukraine gets obliterated and the government has no choice but to reach peace and give away a lot of land. That would be bad. Another way it happens, which I think the U.S. is hoping, but I'm not convinced, is that both Russia and Ukraine get so tired of fighting each other that both sides realize they can't win. It ain't clear that's happening anytime soon. Thank you, it's me, for the hot dog there. It's not clear anytime soon that that's happening. So that worries me. I don't see how a peace deal works short of Ukraine getting its land back. Part of the problem here too is unless Putin gets overthrown and a nicer government comes in. Thank you, Callum, for that. And Flower Lady, we've got the whale. Thank you for the whale. We'll do the wave on TikTok. Thank you, guys. I was saying that I feel like no matter how the war ends, short of the Russian government getting overthrown, like Putin getting overthrown by somebody who's better, we're just setting ourselves up for another war, right? Ukraine gets all of its land back. Russia still wants more land, right? Ukraine gets some of its land back. Russia wants the rest of the land. And Ukraine wants its land back. So the war is going to happen again at some point. The only way to do this, actually, let me step back again. The only way to actually stop a future war, twofold. One, the Russian leadership gets overthrown and somebody nicer comes in, ha, ha, ha. I think that's what Rat Attack is laughing about on TikTok, and they're right. Like somebody nicer in Russia is going to come in and say, oh my God, this war thing, we were so mean. Sorry. Good. And even if they did, that nobody imperialistic is going to come next and say, we want Ukraine back. Probably the only way at whatever the peace deal is, the only way at stopping a future war is going to be Ukraine joining NATO. That's it. There's no other way around it. Thank you, Pam, for that, or PS Pam, for that. I think it's the only way. The same reason that we are not going to war with Russia right now, and Russia's not going to war with us, is because we both have nukes. The NATO collectively has nukes, because even though Poland doesn't have nukes, Poland is a member of NATO. Therefore, Poland is protected by the British, the French, and the American nuclear umbrella. If Ukraine became part of NATO, Ukraine would be protected, and Russia would know they couldn't touch Ukraine. That's the only way to protect Ukraine going forward. Now, part of the problem for NATO is we'd have to have Ukraine settled to a degree. Thank you, Life is Amazing. You'd have to know that, for example, if Russia is still occupying Crimea and Crimea is still saying Russia is still occupying Crimea and the Ukrainians are still saying Crimea belongs to us, even if Ukraine joined NATO, you'd have a real risk of war breaking out between Ukraine and Russia over Crimea. And that's something NATO doesn't like. NATO doesn't like to invite, I forgot, I'd read sort of the rules on this once. They want people whose borders are settled, who don't get into sort of regular wars with their neighbors and stuff. That wouldn't apply to Ukraine if Crimea is still not settled. Now, and I'm not suggesting this as a solution, but one way, okay, Ukraine gets all of its land back and somehow somehow the Russians stop fighting and we immediately make Ukraine part of NATO. I think the French and the Germans and the Hungarians are going to say no way. And Turkey's going to extort us for more money or something. The other possibility is you get Russia on. I mean, this has been floated. I am not saying we should do this, but it's important to throw this stuff out there. Ukraine agrees to give up Crimea. The Russians agree that that's enough. They give back all the rest of the land, and Ukraine joins NATO. So all of a sudden, no way. But my point is, all of a sudden, look, the best negotiations sort of have things that everybody wants and things that nobody wants, right? If Ukraine joins NATO, Ukraine's never getting attacked again. But does Ukraine have to give up Crimea? That is not where we are now. And that's not where I am now. But short of a deal like that, Ukraine would basically have to beat the Russians 100%, and then NATO would have to let them in. I'm not sure that's going to happen. So I don't see a peace deal happening. Like, even with Putin losing power, I just don't see how a peace deal. I think, unfortunately, Biden and France and Germany literally want Ukraine to give up land. But I don't even think mind you, I don't even think they're thinking give up Crimea and we'll let you in NATO. They're thinking give up Crimea and we'll make lots of promises to help you, kind of, sort of, maybe, but not really a NATO Article 5 promise. So we're not really going to promise to go to war if you give up Crimea, which then from a Ukrainian perspective should be, then why should I give up Crimea? Right? And again, not that they want to give it up anyway, but if they were to, you get NATO, you become a member of NATO immediately. If that happens, thank you. Life is amazing. You just, that's what you do, right? So anyway, it's not clear how this ends. It's really not. But it cannot end with us abandoning Ukraine, and us just cutting them off. That's just unacceptable. We've got more here. Thank you, Vic Cruz. Excuse me. Thank you for the heart there from Jens, maybe. Jens or Jens, we never quite know with our international audience. If Russia and Ukraine come together and agree on peace, I wonder what Russia would say to its population. Well, it would have to be some peace deal. Well, it doesn't have to be, but it would be some peace deal that Russia would say, look, we won. I mean, first of all, Russia could have ended the war months ago. They could have said, we did what we wanted. We denazified Ukraine, right? We had the Azov battalion, because they say the Azov battalion are Nazis. We had the Azov battalion in Mariupol, and we fought them for 2 months, and we beat them. And they did. The Azov battalion had to finally give up. Right there, they could have said, we beat the Nazis. I mean, they're not Nazis, but the Russians called them Nazis. They could have said, okay, denazification. Click. We did that. Thank you, Nathan, Timothy, Aflac for the tuck. So they could have said that. Demilitarization. They could lie, but they could say, we have destroyed the Ukrainian military. Look at what we've done to their infrastructure across the country. We've bombed all of their top cities, blah, 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 right? So that would allow the Russians and I just think there's ample opportunity for the Russians to have said, we did what we promised. Ukraine is now no longer a threat. But Putin wanted to, but that's not what Putin's goal was. Putin's goal was to annex Ukraine, to make Ukraine part of Russia. And he's stupid enough, went ahead and did it. I mean, earlier, right, 2014, and then later they did it to Crimea, which now they consider Russia. And last September, they did it to these states. They made it part of Russia. Well, now what do? Now it puts Putin in a horrible bind because Ukraine is slowly getting back those regions. And if Russia loses those regions, Russia is losing regions that Russia claims are part of Russia. I mean, that doesn't really help you with the Russian people, right? You declare that this is part of Russia and now you're giving it away. How is that a victory? So Putin, unfortunately, put himself in a bit of a corner on that one too, sadly. So yeah, I don't know, but I mean, then again, I'm sure he'd come up. I'm sure he'd come up with a good lie for his population. I don't think that would be a problem. Well, and this is a problem too. Brave Cobra is saying on Twitch, I doubt that it would be a nicer person who arrived after Putin gets overthrown. More likely, it might be even worse. And that's true too. I always tell folks one of the things that we studied in graduate school, I did a foreign service school at Georgetown, which is like international public relations, but not public relations, international public policy, not public relations. And one of the things they teach you is, it's the old Greek, be careful what you wish for. If you're going to overthrow a government, you better be sure who's coming next, because who's coming next could be a lot worse. Or in the case of Iraq, we were very worried about that if Saddam Hussein got overthrown, Iraq could fall apart. You've got certain countries, Russia's one of them, where you kind of have a dictator who's holding a lot of different ethnic groups together who don't really want to be together. Well, once the dictator goes away, what happens? The ethnic groups go, we're free. And then they have a civil war because they hate each other, right? So that's a danger too of whether we had a role or not. Just even if Russia itself just gets rid of Putin, the danger is who comes next. And would it be somebody worse? Or would it be somebody weaker, and all of a sudden Russia starts falling apart and you've got a country that is 11 time zones across, that's huge, that has nuclear weapons, which could be dangerous as well. How old am I? So old that when I was a kid, we had dial telephones and a Walkman when I was in college. That's how old I am. What else we got here? We can do a couple more questions. Maybe. I mean, Stoltenberg said the other day, Ukraine will be a member of NATO someday. The thing is, Stoltenberg, I think, is ahead of everybody else. He's the, what do we call it? The Secretary General of NATO, but he's ahead of everybody else. I find a little more out in a good way, but a little more out there. Let me see here. Thank you for the little heart there, Elle. I saw that out of the corner of my eye. What we got here? Well, that's possible too. Mr. White is saying people assume that Putin's successor will be worse, but that's not been the case in modern Russian history. We got Yeltsin. Thank you, Hazel. Another unicorn fantasy. Thank you for that. I am old enough to remember the Soviet Union. Absolutely. Yes. I was born in the 1960s. So by the 1970s, because I was a precocious high school student, by the 1970s, I wrote a letter to Leonid Brezhnev when I was in high school about his treatment of Andrei Sakharov, because I was so pissed off about what they were doing to Sakharov that I literally wrote a letter and mailed it off. And I think I was like 14, but that's who I am. So yes, I had ample familiarity with I went to the Soviet Union in 1984. That was fascinating. Nice people, horrific dictatorship. Unbelievable what I saw. We'll have to do a show talking about the Soviet Union at some point. I can show you like my memorabilia and other stuff and just tell you stories. It was just, oh my God, horrific dictatorship. They had these we always laughed because you would, you'd have to book your tour. You had to book a tour because this was the Soviet Union. You didn't just go. It wasn't like Europe where you show up and get a hotel, right? So Andrei Sakharov, Google him, very famous Russian dissident, a Jewish refusenik, a Jewish scientist. The Jews were oppressed in Russia. And a famous, very famous man for human rights defender for standing up to the government and world renowned internationally. It's Andrei Sakharov. Sakharov, I want to say I'm going to get it wrong. Sakarov, something like that. If you Google it, it'll come up. Very famous man. But when you'd go to Russia, you had to organize your trip with like Intourist, like these tourist agencies, and they'd book your flight. And of course it was the Soviet airline. They would book your rooms and you'd stay in these special dormitories for foreigners. And one of the funny things was, and you knew you were being followed and everything, but one of the funny things was they warned us. First, they warned you at customs that the Russian and you would read up on this, that the Russian, this is before the internet, mind you, 1984. So you read books, people would warn you that at the passport control, the Russian guys were going to take your passport and they were going to do this, right? So, and again, scary at Soviet military guy, the hat, the whole deal, passport, takes it, and they open it, and he goes like this. I'm going to do this for TikTok so you can see. So he's looking at me now. At this point, I started laughing. They sit there, and we're talking, this could be 20 seconds, 30 seconds of them just looking at the paper and then looking into your eyes for 10 seconds, trying to freak you out. And then they'd look, and 3 times they would do it. The best part, though, like I said, by the 3rd time the guy looked at me, I started cracking up because I thought it was so funny. I mean, it was creepy, but it was funny. And I was like, oops, sorry. And they'd probably had enough Americans who were just asses. The other thing they warned us, and we'll do a Soviet show another time. The other thing they warned us was your room was likely going to have a music box, and it was going to be like a radio. The radio was plugged into the wall, but it wasn't plugged into the wall. It was hardwired into the wall. So you couldn't unplug it. And the radio had, and of course it would play patriotic music and words that we didn't understand, but all patriotic music, because this is a room for foreigners. You could adjust the volume up and down, but you couldn't turn it off. So the best you could do was make the volume less annoying of this nonstop patriotic Russian music in your room. But again, you couldn't pull it out of the wall because it was hardwired. I mean, little things like that are just so Soviet dictator chic. That it's a spy box. It's a spy box. And the spy box just, they were listening. And the box just kept playing music 24 hours a day. There was no turning it off. All sorts of, but nice people. We met tons of nice people, Russians can be very nice people. I mean, when they're not committing genocide, but they're very hospitable, welcome you in their homes, this kind of thing. This was 1984. It was early 1984 in February when all the premiers were dying. We had already lost, I'm trying to remember if it was like Brezhnev died, Andropov died, and I think we were between Andropov and Chernenko, if I'm getting my men correct, the order. But we had already had 2 die when we arrived, so it was a fascinating time to be there. Anyway, it was so cool. And like I said, I've got a lot of interesting little, things that we got there, stories of meeting Russian soldiers. Oh my God, it was fascinating. Anyway, I was studying abroad in Paris. I was doing my junior year abroad in college when I was 19 in Paris, and the dollar was very strong. And back then, France especially, remember, we didn't have internet. France still has wonderful travel agencies where you can go in and they've got trips around the world. And for some reason, they're ridiculously cheap. In France, oh my God, they're cheap. Thank you, Harold. And I go in, and this trip must have been, I looked at it and I'm seeing Moscow and Leningrad, which is what they called St. Petersburg. And I'm looking at Moscow and Leningrad, and this price was somewhere from $250 to $350 maybe. But it was, mind you, it was 30 years ago, but it still was equal to paying $500 today. It was a 10-day trip, airplane included, hotel included, all meals included, tour guide included. But of course, the tour guide's a spy who's keeping an eye on you. So of course she's included. And it was like $250, $350. And I called my mom and I was like, please let me go. I mean, how do you not go? Right. It was a crazy deal. And we got to go to Moscow and Leningrad. It was February. It was insane. mean, let me just tell you, you don't go to St. Petersburg in February. It was so cold. And the Russians love ice cream, and they're so into the cold that they've got ice cream stands on the street. And is it what, Molodezhnoye, I think, something like that. I remember the word for ice cream because it was everywhere. And you'd get ice cream standing on the street. And I think I want to vaguely say it was like wrapped in foil, like a square. And it wasn't terrible, and you'd eat your ice cream on the street, but it was freezing. It was so far below. It's February in Russia. And you're eating ice cream on the street going, okay, what do you do? No, Russia. And anyway, I have so many stories about Russia. Again, my impression was horrific dictatorship, but some nice people. Standard of living, not great. And the people were very worried. I mean, I told you, I had one guy that came up to me in the bus, super tall, blonde Russian with the hat on, the fur hat, they all the fur hats, and we're crammed on the bus. And of course, I'm wearing my US down coat, because it was freezing in Russia. So I had my mom mail my coat to me in France, and my down coat, it's my ski coat. Well, I got a ski coat. It's red, white, and blue, right? I mean, it's red, white, and blue. That's my ski coat. Well, in Russia, in the Soviet Union, everybody's wearing black and brown. I mean, and I don't think it's just a fashion statement. They did not have colorful. Did the sound die? Some people are saying the sound is out. Are you guys hearing the sound on TikTok or not? Just real quick. Is the sound working or not for you guys? Sassy, is it? I hear you. Sound is fine. Okay, enough of you are saying it's fine. Interesting. You know what? But most of you are saying it's fine, so I'm going to keep going. So, tall Russian guy, 6 foot something, blonde, beautiful guy, big fur hat, and I'm in my red, white, and blue American ski jacket, 19, and it's freezing. So I've got I ski, so I've got my ski hat on, and it's a ski hat that, of course, is red, white, and blue. And it's one of those cool ski hats that comes to a point. So we're obviously Westerners. And this guy comes to my ear, and I hear, literally, I'm with my friends, and the Moscow buses, you're like packed together. I hear in my ear, does Mr. Reagan want nuclear war? And literally, I was like, what? And the guy asked me, does Mr. Reagan want nuclear war? And I was like, no. So we had a nice, 5-10 minute discussion on the bus. Everyone on the bus is staring at him like, are you crazy that you're talking to these Americans? And we had a nice discussion. And I mean, and I told him, Americans were worried about the Russians too. I probably told him what I tell you guys, that I think because we both have nuclear weapons, we're both afraid, but I said, our people think you want nuclear war. And that's a lot of the reason you see us saying this. But I figured best thing to do, obviously, is to have a nice conversation with this guy. So at least he talked to a nice American, and maybe he says, the guy was nice, but it was amazing. Yeah, never to be seen again, practically. But lots of, and the chewing gum stories for another day. But anyway, like I said, I think I will do a special episode talking about traveling to Russia and the Soviet Union, because it was fascinating. It was absolutely fascinating. All right, let me just look here. I'll do one more TikTok question. And then let's do a wrap up, and we are done. Oops, TikTok screaming in my ear. All right. Can't get to all the questions, as you guys understand, but you know how it is. Deep. Possibly. That's an interesting question. PAWLWC, Pollock is saying, do you think a younger Biden would be totally different to what he is now with Ukraine? Maybe. Thank you, Noni, for that. I think one thing, look, Biden's getting old. I mean, I'm not going to deny it. I will say this. I don't think we've had any problems with his age, though. Right? I can't point to anything in U.S. policy where it's, boy, he screwed that up because he's an old man, right? I do. I think Biden's old, but I don't think that's the case, right? So that's good. The one thing where I think younger Biden would do so much better, Younger Biden was a very good speaker. He was a better speaker. And he's saying he was never a good speaker, but younger Biden was a better speaker. If you look at him, he had chaired the Foreign Relations Committee hearings. He could speak better. He could speak more to you, open. This Biden is, I think, because he's older, he's a little quieter, a little more reserved. He doesn't speak as well. I just think he's not as good of a presenter. And I think he would do a much better job explaining the war and selling it to the American people. Because as I've said from the beginning, I think he's got to do a better job selling the war to people. I had somebody the other day on Twitter tell me, oh, the war speaks for itself. The war doesn't speak for itself. No war speaks for itself. You've got to, and frankly, it's a correct thing. You've got to explain to people, why is it we're spending all this money? Why is it we're spending this weapons? Why is it that we're getting involved in somebody else's war? Isn't there the possibility we could get dragged into it? That's a fair question, right? I don't think we are going to get dragged in, but those are fair questions. And when you don't answer those questions well, all it does is make the bad guys kind of fill the void. Or even better, if you don't explain it well, the people who have the questions are still worrying. They're going, well, Biden didn't explain to me very well that we're not going to get into this war. In fact, Biden kept talking about World War III, right? The very guy, if he keeps talking about World War III, then why are we in this war? If anything, I think Biden's messaging was actually not very good. I do speak Greek. My Greek is rusty now, though. Was not very, it was, discordant, came from two different sides there, So anyway, hello, Ukraine. Good to see you there, Castrotech. So I think a younger Biden would have done a better job speaking up. He might have been more aggressive too. I don't know, though. I don't know. Because I still think you are the man you are. So I don't think age. Yeah, Tina Supo. Tolinika mo din ito sa kalatora, yet then milaw me kanenas. So they wanted me to speak in Greek, but I told them I don't speak Greek with anybody anymore, so it's not so good now. I did have a fight with my cousin in Greece 30 years ago in Greek. It was quite good. That was when my Greek was super fluent. And when you're having a fight with your cousin in Greek in the town square, that you're good. Now I would have a hard time fighting in Greek. I could fight in French. I'd have a hard time fighting in Greek. All right, guys, I'm going to call it quits. Let's do a quick recap of the news that we covered today. And then we'll be back tomorrow for more exciting Ukrainian words. I've been trying. Ukrainian is difficult. Someone asked, did I learn any Ukrainian words? What's been hard with Ukrainian is thank you for the gifts there, Benji. I had studied Russian for a year in college. And it was very difficult. I learned a lot. I learned phrases, I learned vocabulary. The grammar was extremely difficult. And our teacher was a Russian emigre. So he literally was like right off the boat from Russia. And he was just a Nazi. He was horrible. He was not interested in people like me who just didn't understand the grammar, right? I went on Duolingo and was checking out the Ukrainian. I don't want to do Discord tonight. Nah, we did last night. And it's already 7:30 now. It was so difficult when I went on to Duolingo, which is a really good language app for Ukrainian. It confused the hell out of me. When I went on for Russian, I kept advancing, even though I only have 1 year of Russian. I kept advancing levels because I was getting the basic sentences and learning vocabulary that I went, oh yeah, that word, in Ukrainian, I feel it's a Steve Martin joke. Those Ukrainians, they have a different word for everything. Anybody who knows Steve Martin back in the 70s will know my joke. So many of the words are different, yet the language is close to Russian that it confused the hell out of me. It just confused the hell out of me. So I finally had decided that it might be easier for me to basically take the Russian I've got, which is a year of it. And I can read Russian. I just don't understand it all, but I can read the alphabet, all that kind of stuff. It might be easier for me just to build my Russian. And at least when I go to Ukraine, I can use my Russian, and people, A, people understand Russian, and B, people understand as an American why I'm speaking Russian. They're not going to be offended, but I tried the Ukrainian. I can say Privit. and Yaku, but otherwise it's just too hard. Whereas in Russian, I learned expressions in Russian, what was it? I mean, у меня зовут Vanya, очень хорошо, or what is that? I wouldn't say очень хорошо, how to meet you. What's the word? I'm trying to think of what's the word nice to meet you? No, очень приятно. I remember things like that, but I can't, but in Ukrainian, I was like, oh God. None of them are easy. They're very difficult languages because of all the crazy declensions. Ukrainian, like Russian, like Greek, like German, nouns change based on where they are in the sentence. So I remember, for example, in Russian class, we had, I am going to the post office. And I am going to the post office was я, I, idu, going, na, to, and then it's почта. Почта is post office, right? Почта. But because I'm going to the post office, I'm not going to the почта, I'm going to the почту. The noun changes based on how it's being used in the sentence. And I was like, oh my God. So not only are you learning all the vocabulary, it just keeps changing. And Greek does the same thing. German, I'm told, is the same thing, where basically like the name George in Greek, the name George is Yorgos, like Georgios, okay? But if I call you and say George, I would say Yorgo. So I would say Giorgio. I drop the S. If I'm saying this is George's paper, I would say what? Ine ikarthi to Yorgu. So all of a sudden, it's the paper of Georgiou. So it's Georgios is his name. Giorgio is his name if I call him, hey, Giorgio. And this is Georgiou's paper, OU. And it's worse than that. How do you do that? I mean, again, Polish, I'm guessing these are it's interesting that German has it too. In Greek, I finally went to Greek for a summer, and it helped me a lot in Greek because being there for 4 months, I studied it, but being there for 4 months, hearing it helped a lot. Because you hear people and you just start to learn that oh yeah, it's to your who, sto your go. Like you hear it and start to learn it, but learning it as an outsider in a book, Finnish has 16 cases. Oh, screw you, Finland. I would die. But it's sad because anyway, so that was a very long answer to say, I'm not convinced I'm ever going to pull off Ukrainian unless I live there. Unless I live there, I can start learning the words, but I think I'm in a better position studying more Ukraine because I'm going to go to Ukraine at some point for sure. Now studying more of my Russian. So at least I can get around, and then, people can correct me and say, it's not that word. It's, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. French, I mean, I learned French in France. So for me, French was easy, so to speak, because I lived in France for a year, I mean, each language has its, I'm dying to go to Ukraine. I don't know. I was going to go to Ukraine in November on a charity run, but then, things started getting worse and worse with Putin making threats and missiles and everything that we canceled it. And now obviously things are just worse and worse. So, at this point, I just don't totally feel like it's safe to go, What was the fight with my cousin about? You cracked me up. I'm just not convinced it's totally safe. Ukraine's evolved from Greek and Latin. No, that's interesting. Well, you may have some words at least that are similar. Hungarian's hard. Yeah, they're not easy languages. I was actually looking at Romanian just for fun because I speak Italian. And there's similarities. I will say this with Romanian. If you look at a sentence in Romanian, it's hard to understand. When someone tells you what the sentence means, then you go, like you're able to see the Latin and the Italian and the French. You can see the words kind of pop out and you go, that's what it means. So I could see learning Ukrainian to a degree. I love languages. Languages are fun. German, never studied German. I had to use a little bit of German because we were in East Germany and I was trying to talk to the East German border guards. And, you know, and they were nice. This was when the Berlin Wall was coming down. They were nice, but it was, you know, Portuguese is close to Gaelic. I don't know. Is it Portuguese? Get out. I did study Portuguese for a year too. I had a little bit. Now I can't do anything in Portuguese. But I just think languages are exciting. They're so much fun, you know, even German. I mean, I wouldn't get to use German much as an American, you know. Actually, I did have fun because the other day, Sasha, my little dog, likes to meet kids and stuff. And a little girl was walking by, was like, oh. So I said to her, oh, I always tell the parents, oh, she's very nice. She likes kids. You can meet her if you want. The kids came up and the mom tells the kid, you know, you can caress her very nicely. But she said it in Italian. Also, you kind of use the same word in French and Spanish. I'm forgetting in Spanish what the word would be for caress. I don't know if it's calinas, or I'm forgetting what it is in Spanish, but in French you'd say caresse. And she used the Italian word, and I was like, oh, because I'm used to these kids being Latino that we get to talk Spanish. And I was able to switch enough, which was fun, to basically tell the kids, oh, her name is Sasha. She's very nice. And it was cute. The mother was very excited that I spoke Italian, but it's fun. I love that. That's why I like traveling. I love being able to use languages when you're abroad, because you meet people, kids or older people who don't speak English. And it's a lot of fun. Caricias, you'd say? Would you say darla caricias or darle? Cariciar. Okay. Cariciar. So it is to caress. So it's like caresse. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Because in Italian, she said, I believe she said cariziare is what she said in Italian. I'm pretty sure that was it. And I heard cariziare and I took it as caresse and I went, she's talking Italian. Yeah. Yeah. That was it. Good. Acariciar. Now you're getting even harder here. Whew. Anyway. All right, guys, enough of the languages. Oh my God. Okay. This is good. Thank you guys. I appreciate this so much. Did we do the summary? I don't even remember. I'm tired. Let me not do the summary tonight. I'm tired. It's 7:30. It's 7:30. To caress, cariciar. There you go. Yep. All right. Yeah. Oh, I did read that about Romanian. Yep. No, I was watching a YouTube video about Romanian and how it looks like the Romans settled there originally, and that Romania ended up with kind of I don't know if they called it a dirty Latin or some kind of a different Latin, but that it was the basis of the whole thing. And then, of course, influences from the Slavic languages and everything. Now, I should have been a linguist. I mean, that would have been my joy, just traveling around the world, talking to people, languages. I love it. And I love words, and I love it's fun. You know, all that stuff. Anyway, all right, guys, I'm going to go going. Tomorrow, 6 p.m. Eastern time, US, we will be doing this again Thursday night. Do go and check out the Discord. We've got, like I said, we've got a lot of auctions going on right now. The Ukrainian sweatshirt, the Zelensky sweatshirts. These are the actual sweatshirts he wears from the same place. We've got these. I've got some cool stamps, Ukrainian commemorative stamps that are commemorating the Ukrainian weapons. Colonel Mustard got me some of these, and they're commemorating the HIMARS, the Javelin, the Stugna, the Neptune, which is the cruise missile that took out the Moskva. So they're really cool. Oh yeah, the Azovstal bracelet, which is probably this and the bracelet are people's favorites, and something else I'm spacing out about that I can't remember. Oh, the kids drawing. Yeah, we've got the kids drawing. That's really cool too. Actually, I can show you the kids drawing because we made T-shirts of it. But they're a little drawing that a little girl made in Ukraine, and we turned them into T-shirts. This was the drawing, and they're very cool because we turned them into T-shirts, and they say Slava Ukraini on top. Slava Ukraini on top, and then the bottom, I keep forgetting. The bottom says like "Come home well" or something like that. But it's a message to the troops, and it's really cute. It's really nice. But it's got the sunflower, the storks, angels, like all the Ukrainian symbols, which are really nice. So, yeah, can you hear Sasha? She's wiggling in the background. Oh yeah. Oh, she's going to the front door to look for the neighbor and then coming for me. All right, guys. Have a good night. Go check out my links in my bio on TikTok, my links in aravosis.com, and I will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you for the gifts as always. Thank you for the support, and thank you for the mods for going after the trolls. All right. See you guys tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye. You guys, bye-bye.